Welcome to Middle East Briefing. The content of the briefing includes Israel accused of starvation in Gaza, as US looks to next phase of war. How Saudi Arabia could use its leverage in Gaza. Getting re-elected was the easy part for Sisi. But Egypt is on the brink. Austin heads to Israel as US urges transition to a more targeted approach in Gaza. A Palestinian revival. Israel accused of starvation in Gaza, as US looks to next phase of war. South China Morning Post. Human Rights Watch, HRW, has accused Israel of committing a war crime by deliberately starving people in the Gaza Strip. HRW claims that Israeli forces have been blocking the delivery of food, water and fuel to Gaza, as well as destroying agricultural areas and depriving the region's 2.3 million residents of essential supplies. The group called on world leaders to speak out against the abhorrent war crime. The Israeli government is yet to respond to the allegations. The HRW report comes after Pope Francis accused Israel of terrorism due to the reported killing of 2 Christian women in a church complex. Meanwhile, the death toll continues to rise in Gaza, with 90 Palestinians reported dead in the Jabalia refugee camp on Sunday. Other casualties were reported in Deir al-Balah and Rafah. The United Nations Security Council is expected to vote today on a proposal demanding that Israel and Hamas allow better access for aid, as well as the monitoring of deliveries. How Saudi Arabia could use its leverage in Gaza. Foreign policy. Saudi Arabia, despite its silence on the matter, is using its symbolic position as the guardian of Islam's holy sites to exert pressure on Israel in the ongoing conflict in Gaza. The Saudi ruling elites are leading a diplomatic effort to generate an international narrative that questions the legality of Israeli military aggression and the American diplomatic cover it is utilizing. The Saudis have also refused to engage in any political discussions about the future until a ceasefire is achieved, as they do not want to lend legitimacy to Israel's actions. While the Saudis may not be able to force Israel to stop the war, they are using their influence to shape the narrative and keep diplomatic pressure on the United States. Additionally, the Saudis have significant financial leverage over Israel, as they can provide funding for Gaza's reconstruction efforts. However, they are unlikely to agree to pay for the reconstruction of an inherited catastrophe and take responsibility for its security. The Saudis are currently focused on their own rebuilding process and investing in Saudi Arabia's future. Nonetheless, they may be willing to invest in a future Palestinian state and contribute to the rebuilding of its infrastructure if it is part of a political process with clear horizons and goals. The incentives for Saudi Arabia and other Arab states to contribute to Gaza's reconstruction can be increased if done within the right framework and with the goal of regional security and prosperity in mind. Getting re-elected was the easy part for Sisi. But Egypt is on the brink. Washington Post. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi has won a third term in a presidential election that was predetermined. Election officials announced that Sisi received nearly 90% of the vote, while the other candidates received just 10% between them. Turnout, at just under 67%, was higher than in previous elections, with election officials calling it unprecedented in Egyptian history. However, there were reports of voter coercion and inducements, such as the distribution of coupons, to encourage people to vote for Sisi. Sisi, a former general who came to power after a coup in 2013, has already served 2 terms, and a constitutional amendment in 2019 allows him to remain in office until 2030. However, he faces numerous challenges, including a collapsing economy and an ongoing war in neighboring Gaza. Egypt is deeply in debt, with an economy that is struggling and heavily reliant on tourism and imports. The country's external debt has reached nearly $165 billion, and it faces looming deadlines to repay at least $42 billion to lenders next year. Inflation is high, with prices of basic commodities soaring, and poverty is on the rise. The war in Gaza has given Sisi a boost, with many Egyptians supporting his stance on not displacing Palestinians and protecting Egypt's sovereignty and security. However, there are concerns that Sisi's iron-fisted rule and mismanagement of the economy are causing economic hardship and humiliation for ordinary Egyptians. While welfare programs offer basic support to the poor, the middle class is being hollowed out, and there are fears of an upcoming devaluation of the pound. Many Egyptians are pessimistic about the future and expect prices to continue rising, exacerbating their financial struggles. Austin heads to Israel as U.S. urges transition to a more targeted approach in Gaza. Associated Press. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin is expected to urge Israel to wind down major combat operations in Gaza during his visit to the country. France, the UK, and Germany, some of Israel's closest allies, have called for a ceasefire, and Israeli protesters have demanded the government re-engage in talks with militant group Hamas to release hostages. However, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has stated that Israel will continue fighting until Hamas is removed from power and all remaining hostages are freed. The U.S. has vetoed international calls for a ceasefire but has urged Israel to take greater steps to protect civilians. Austin is expected to press Israeli leaders to transition to a more targeted phase of operations aimed at Hamas leaders, tunnels, and hostage rescues. Israel has faced criticism for causing civilian deaths and destroying infrastructure in Gaza, with over 18,700 Palestinians killed and 1.9 million displaced. A Palestinian revival. Foreign affairs. The ongoing conflict between Israel and Gaza has raised questions about what will happen after the fighting stops. The Biden administration has outlined its day-after parameters, including the return of a revitalized Palestinian Authority, PA, to Gaza and a political process leading to a two-state solution. However, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has rejected the return of the PA to Gaza and plans to keep Israeli forces in the region indefinitely. The article suggests that a unitary and cohesive Palestinian political leadership is needed for the future of Gaza, but this will require a reconciliation between rival factions, including Hamas, which is unlikely to happen without external pressure. It also proposes that the PA should be disentangled from the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, and a technocratic government should be established to stabilize and rebuild Gaza, while the PLO evolves to include Hamas and other factions, providing credible political leadership and gaining the support of the Palestinian people. The ongoing conflict in Gaza has caused massive displacement, destruction, and suffering, with devastating consequences for the region. Israel's goal of eliminating Hamas as a political and military force is unlikely to be achieved, and the recent Israeli assault has only strengthened support for Hamas among Palestinians. The inclusion of Hamas in Palestinian politics is necessary to moderate the group and limit its ability to act on its own, and decisions of war and peace should be made collectively by the Palestinian people. The article argues that a credible, legitimate, and united Palestinian leadership is needed to rebuild and stabilize Gaza, and this requires a revival of Palestinian institutional politics and the PLO. The United States and Israel will need to abandon the idea that they can control or engineer Palestinian politics, and instead support the normalization of Hamas within the context of a revived Palestinian political system. This will be a difficult process, but it is necessary for the future stability and peace in the region. Women attend Tehran Derby but equality battle still rages. Deutsche Welle. Women were allowed to attend a football match in Iran for the first time since the revolution, but activists claim that the move is just a symbolic gesture and not a genuine commitment to gender equality. The women were segregated from men and had to enter through separate entrances, despite the stadium having a capacity of over 78,000. Activist Maryam Shoji has called for tickets to be sold equally to men and women, and for girls to be able to attend matches with their fathers. The activist also criticized the enforcement of mandatory hijab laws in Iran. CIA director to discuss resuming hostage and prisoner exchanges between Israel and Hamas. New York Times. CIA Director William J. Burns is set to meet Israeli and Qatari officials in Warsaw on Monday to discuss restarting hostage and prisoner exchanges. Talks will aim to continue the humanitarian releases that occurred under a week-long truce between Israel and Hamas last month. However, resuming talks has been complicated by deeper differences over the terms of further exchanges. After the agreement fell through, U.S. officials claimed that Hamas reneged on the agreement to release all female hostages. Israeli officials, on the other hand, said that Hamas failed to release as many hostages as promised and made more demands. The accidental deaths of 3 hostages put the Israeli government under pressure to secure the release of those still held by Hamas and its allies in Gaza. The U.S. is also increasing pressure on Israel to scale back its major combat operations in Gaza and transition to a new phase in the war. A year on from Qatar 2022, what's the legacy of a World Cup like no other? CNN. A year on from the 2022 World Cup, questions are being asked about the legacy of the tournament with regards to both human rights abuses and worker rights in Qatar. Critics have argued that reform has been slow and that not enough has been done to ensure fair conditions and decent work for the hundreds of thousands of migrant workers who helped build the infrastructure for the tournament. Amnesty International said in a briefing that the legacy for migrant workers in the country was in serious peril. However, Qatar has said that it is committed to labor reform and that this was always intended to continue long after the tournament ended. FIFA has said that significant progress has been made, but has acknowledged that more needs to be done. On the pitch, the tournament has been a success and many locals have fond memories of it. The tournament has also opened up the game to a new region, with Saudi Arabia set to host the 2034 World Cup. However, Saudi Arabia has also been accused of human rights abuses, and critics have called on FIFA to ensure human rights protections ahead of the tournament. While the legacy of the tournament will be debated for years to come, it is clear that it has had an impact on the region and has been used as a blueprint by other nations to host global sporting events. Saudi PE firm Jadwa eyes $530 million fund for Mideast deals. Bloomberg. Saudi private equity firm, Jadwa Investment, plans to raise up to SAR2 $530 million for a new fund that will focus on investing in fast-growing oil exporting countries in the Middle East. The fund will target investments in the Gulf Cooperation Council countries, including Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain and Oman. Jadwa plans to take significant minority stakes in around 12 companies over the next 3 years. Musk's ex probed by EU for illegal content related to Hamas attack in Israel. South China Morning Post. The EU has launched formal infringement proceedings against Elon Musk's X platform under a law cracking down on illegal online content. The EU announced the action after identifying disinformation related to Hamas's October 7 attack in Israel. The action against the platform, formerly known as Twitter, is the first against a major online platform since Brussels implemented the Digital Services Act, DSA. The investigation will look into whether X failed to curb the spread of illegal content and whether measures to combat information manipulation were effective. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Dr. Six, your resident observer from the 6 Degrees world, bringing you the latest news and analysis from around the globe. Let's dive into today's stories. First, Human Rights Watch accuses Israel of deliberately starving people in Gaza, calling it a war crime. Pope Francis also condemned Israel's actions, further escalating tensions in the region. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia is leveraging its position as the guardian of Islam's holy sites to pressure Israel and shape the narrative of the conflict. In Egypt, President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi has won a third term in a predetermined election. However, he faces numerous challenges, including an economy in crisis and the ongoing war in Gaza. The situation in Egypt is on the brink, with rising debt, inflation, and poverty. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin is visiting Israel, urging them to wind down major combat operations in Gaza. The U.S. has vetoed calls for a ceasefire but is pressuring Israel to protect civilians. The Biden administration is outlining its day-after parameters, including a revitalized Palestinian Authority and a two-state solution. However, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu rejects these plans, causing concerns for the future of the region. In Iran, women were allowed to attend a football match for the first time since the revolution. However, activists argue that this is just a symbolic gesture and not a genuine commitment to gender equality. The fight for equality continues. CIA Director William J. Burns is meeting Israeli and Qatari officials to discuss resuming hostage and prisoner exchanges. Talks have been complicated by disagreements over the terms of further exchanges. The U.S. is also pressuring Israel to scale back its operations in Gaza. A year on from the 2022 World Cup in Qatar, questions are being raised about the legacy of the tournament, particularly regarding human rights abuses and worker rights. Critics argue that reform has been slow, but Qatar claims to be committed to labor reform. FIFA acknowledges that more needs to be done. Saudi private equity firm Jadwa Investment plans to raise $530 million for a new fund focusing on investing in fast-growing oil-exporting countries in the Middle East. And finally, the EU has launched infringement proceedings against Elon Musk's X platform for alleged illegal content related to Hamas's attack in Israel. These stories highlight the complex dynamics and challenges in the Middle East. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict continues to escalate, with international pressure mounting on both sides. Egypt is facing a multitude of crises, and Qatar's World Cup legacy is being scrutinized. It's a region in flux, with political, economic, and social issues intertwining. As always, I encourage you, my observant audience, to share your thoughts and questions. What are your perspectives on these issues? Let's engage in a lively discussion together. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.